So again, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat today about, the gluten-free diet and some just kind of fine-tuning modifications we'll chat about. Yes, I'm going to be coming up on my 10-year anniversary of having celiac disease. And it was a shocker to me. I was 35 years old and I was working as a dietitian 11 years at that time. So it really just totally changed my life. And again, kind of the way that I practice as a dietitian, because I really never had to have that lived experience, as you mentioned. So, yes. And yes, so again, I'm excited to talk today. I'm sure people will have questions. If I talk a little bit fast, I will send over like a PDF of the slides that you could always send to everybody if they want to have a copy of them, just so they have that as a resource. Okay. And again, I'm from the University of Chicago in the GI clinic. I work with celiac disease and some other different GI disorders. Okay, so my kind of the theme today is kind of staying curious about your overall gluten-free diet, especially after diagnosis, because symptoms can change, symptoms could be ongoing, and there's a lot of different things going on. There's a lot of different moving parts to it. So again, my goal today, and with all my patients, really with my, counseling and whatnot, and any of my talks, and even with talking to other medical professionals, is to give those realistic tools to really help with that adherence to the gluten-free diet. Because sometimes, no matter what I do, still patients will be cheating on the gluten-free diet, right? So if we can find some ways that could be realistic for them to follow the diet, that's going to be best for their overall quality of life. And that is really the key. As we know, starting the gluten-free diet, it really can make a huge change in your overall lifestyle and affects so many people in your life. As we all know, there's so many layers to the challenges. So again, first being diagnosed, you really have that kind of a shock at diagnosis. And you have to really go through that mourning period and kind of mourn the loss of gluten. I always say to kind of get over it and it requires these kind of new coping skills and kind of a new way to look at things. Because a lot of things are revolved around food. People are trying their best, but they're getting gluten despite, really trying their best intentions when they're trying to eat, and just kind of live their normal life. So it does take a while. I've actually, even yesterday and the day before, I had a few people who really struggled with starting the gluten-free diet. It took them, the one patient, it took her almost 8 months to even go gluten-free, even though she knew she had celiac, but she never saw a dietitian, just was not really, she didn't have any buy-in. She was like, I don't even feel that sick. And didn't start it. And I had another male patient, same exact thing the other day. So I think I'm seeing this a lot more and more, where it's really, they're not able to really cut out gluten fully. So really finding those ways, because this is a lifelong diet. It's not some sort of a diet that you're going to be on for a short term, right? And then just go back onto gluten when you have celiac disease. So this is something that is, we know, lifelong. So it's not easy. I don't know if I can hear almost somebody talking or something, maybe not. Do you hear that? Or no, maybe not. And then, like I said, the quality of life is key. We do know that there are a few studies looking at people who are extremely vigilant on the gluten-free diet, meaning that they are following the diet to a T. They're super anal. They may not eat out at all. Very stressed about the diet. This negatively affects your overall social and emotional wellness, right? I had a patient that literally said she didn't eat out for almost 2 years at the time. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sad for you, right? Like, we want you to be able to eat out. Yes, you might not feel safe in every single kind of restaurant, pub, different kind of place like that, as far as their options or things like that, but really finding those kind of places that you're able to, enjoy going out. And so we know with this like decrease in the quality of life, it's associated with even further anxiety and fatigue. So then it's kind of like this vicious cycle, especially at diagnosis. As we know, I'll talk about in a second, is, a lot of vitamins and minerals are absorbed in that GI tract where we're diagnosed at. And really, it's finding that balance, because sometimes people might actually like gain weight right before their diagnosis. Some people might lose weight right before their diagnosis. So there's this energy shift and weight shift in many individuals. So again, as I said, all things like end up revolving around food and life, right? So whether it's in school, work life, daycare, sending kids to school, if they have food allergies or celiac disease, all those social events, as we know, air travel, road trips, all those things, someone with celiac disease has to really rethink that. They can't live their life as spontaneous as they might have before, right? So it's kind of, I always try to explain to them, like, always kind of having little snacks on you. And I always was good at this before I was even diagnosed, just because I am just like a snacker and would always have little things on me. But for other people, it might be very challenging, right? And I have a good friend who also has celiac disease, who is the dietitian actually at Columbia in New York City. And she just, we had a meeting the other day, and she said to me, Lori, how did you do it? Because she has a baby now who's about a year old. And she's like, it's so hard to eat and remind myself to eat before I'm worrying about her. And someone with celiac, it is hard when you're out and about, you're traveling, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I have no snacks on me, or I'm just hangry, right? That kind of hungry, angry because your blood sugar's low. You just, so again, I always remind people to kind of find those little things that will kind of, get you through different events. One of our doctors, Dr. Verma, always tells patients, for her pediatric patients, to, what's your favorite candy bar? Like, okay, if it's gluten-free, okay, if it's Snickers or whatever it might be, well, then always keep Snickers on you, having the mom keep Snickers in the freezer. So when they go travel, they have their favorite, snack bar or, candy bar, something that will be something like rewarding and something to have kind of look forward to. And again, so it's kind of finding that new kind of like new shoes, like new feet, to kind of adapt to those situations. So again, as we all know, there's so much misinformation online. Some people think they need to avoid so many foods outside of just being gluten-free, and they end up eating like 5 items, right? So there's so much misinformation, and there's really not that many registered dietitians that specialize in GI. Fortunately, we do have a new credential that's starting in the US for a GI registered dietitian. So it's specializing in all the different GI disorders, including celiac disease. So I plan to take that just as another like certification and whatnot for continuing education. So that's pretty exciting, because when I started 21 years ago, there were like no dietitians in GI. Like I was excited to start the job, but there was not many of us. So a lot more of these kind of conferences, you're seeing more dietitians there. And another thing I wanted to touch on is at our clinic, we are so lucky that we have 2 GI psychologists, meaning they're gastrointestinal trained in psychology. So they go through this, internship at Northwestern in Chicago, and it was the first of its kind. And now they've trained, I forgot how many years that they've been doing this now. So now really throughout the US, there are psychologists at many clinics. So what this entails is, if you think about it, there is this kind of brain gut axis. And I'll talk about that in a couple slides. I have a good one. But so there's this site here, the Rome Foundation. You can look up if there are any different gastropsychs. I'm not sure if there's any now yet in the UK or anywhere in Europe yet. That would be exciting if there are. It is very new, as I mentioned. But these individuals are specializing in kind of that brain gut disorder. And I'll talk a little bit more about it too when we get to that slide. But it's very exciting. And there is actually a whole kind of specialty for GI hypnotherapy. So it's very interesting. These patients are walked through different scenarios. I have patients with inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's or colitis, as well as celiac disease and just general IBS. And they may be, really not feeling very well. And after a few of their different sessions, they're like new people. So it's a very interesting way to look at it that's outside of just medicine or what they're eating, right? Or if they're exercising. But it's another kind of way to approach that with the brain gut. So first thinking of, the overall GI tract. So I always say, since I'm a GI dietitian, I help people, and it sounds kind of like crude, but it's like anywhere from the mouth to your anus, right? So I am dealing with patients with disorders throughout that area, whether it be cancer, ostomies, eosinophilic esophagitis, celiac disease, and whatnot. So if you think about people with celiac disease, the diagnosis is always done in that duodenum. And so that area just below the stomach, and it's that first part of the small intestine or the small bowel. And so in that area, as you can see here, there are a variety of vitamins and minerals that are absorbed in that area. And then secondly, if you think about it, you think about like fats are otherwise known as lipids or monos. Then again, amino acids are proteins. So all of these different things are really absorbed in that duodenum. And you think about at diagnosis, if your villi are supposed to be like a kind of like a shag carpet, very long villi, slender villi that absorb things. Sometimes at diagnosis, people's villi are almost smushed down to the lining, almost like a Berber carpet or a wood floor, right? So in that time, they're unfortunately malabsorbing a lot of those different B vitamins, proteins, fats, all those different things. So again, this could be very much overlooked. But this is just something that I always remind my patients that, again, when you're first diagnosed, yeah, you might feel quite poor, and your GI tract really can heal and regenerate fairly quickly, honestly. But again, just starting that gluten-free diet and then finding that balance, right? So again, many people are anemic prior to diagnosis or even after diagnosis. Iron, as you could see in that slide, is absorbed primarily in that first part of your small intestine. So sometimes it's just the villi. It takes them a while to kind of fluff back up and get that in. So there's two types of iron. There's the heme iron, and that's from those animal sources from like meat, fish, poultry, and those are more readily absorbed, meaning you will absorb a lot more of that specific iron in one setting. So up to 30%, which is still not that much, right? Seemingly so, right? Just like that goes for a lot of different foods, though. You might not absorb all of that iron in there. So, but 30% is pretty significant compared to, unfortunately, some of the non-heme sources like your, lentils, nuts, seeds, spinach. Those non-heme, even though they're some, lemons or orange, grapefruit, strawberries, even those have vitamin C. So that can kind of up that iron content in that salad. So again, there's different ways, again, just being creative with ways to kind of up your iron intake. And for some people too, I'm messaging them saying, hey, your iron's still low. Do you need to get an iron infusion? We'll talk to the doctor. Or do you want to maybe try liquid iron? Liquid iron sometimes a little bit easier to tolerate than sometimes those big honking pills that could be a bit, they could cause more constipation symptoms, gas, bloating, all that kind of fun stuff. So those are just some considerations. As I mentioned, this is a very old slide that this Elena Verdu, who was at Mayo and now is in Canada, she really looked back at this kind of brain-gut axis back in, this is from 2009. From 2009. And so they looked at the fact that someone can have a GI infection, some other kind of antigen, something like H. pylori, which causes ulcers. It could be gluten, it could be stress, and it could cause the same exact kind of cascade of effect, kind of affecting that whole line of defense in the GI tract, kind of that wall in the GI tract with the epithelium, and kind of you'll hear sometimes people talk about tight junctions. What I always say is that when you're first diagnosed with celiac disease, your intestines, they might kind of be the less integrity, right? So if your gut is not strong and having good integrity, that could affect so many different things too, affecting, again, your sensations and things. So again, when you're first diagnosed, it could feel like a variety of things. You're more gassy, bloated, everything is being affected. But interestingly so, we know that someone being high stress can cause that kind of brain gut response similar to them getting gluten. So again, it can affect your motility, which is again that emptying in your esophagus, stomach, or your intestines. It also could affect that actual absorption and then that kind of sensation of what you're eating. So what's really neat is that these GI psychologists have been able to work with these patients to really find a way to work with that kind of that pain, that kind of more visceral hypersensitivity where they're almost very more pronounced to be more in pain. And again, what's really interesting and kind of exciting about this is that now people are actually seeing an overlap with people who have like endometriosis and fibroids and things like that were always overlooked, saying, oh, you just have more, IBS and this and that, but there's this pain kind of response, right? So even just working with some of those different methods can help this outside of just the diet. So I always like that kind of slide to look at that kind of cascade of effect. So again, when people are diagnosed with celiac disease, there's a variety of emotions that go on. Up to almost 80% in a study of over 500 patients that were adults with celiac disease noted that they experienced that social anxiety. So really like worrying about, again, when they're eating, what they're going to have as choices when they're eating out and whatnot. They had that, again, another subset of these patients that were in that young adult category, 25 to 35. And those that were fairly newly diagnosed within 1 year up to 4 years also noted that they had an increase in that kind of disordered eating, and a lower quality of life overall. And this is very understandable, and it's actually great that they're looking at this. These are my friends that are at the Columbia University in New York City, and Lee and Jessica Lebovitz. And what's so exciting about them, working with them on a study that I'm on right now, is that all three of us have celiac disease, as well as Melinda Dennis. So all four of us actually, out of 5, have celiac disease out of dietitians, which is really a rare thing. So we really have to live it. And, so we'll be at conferences together and like band together. Okay, where are we eating at? Or what is our, because yes, we know that sometimes you could have disordered eating. And sometimes too, if you're traveling and things like that and you don't have the best options, okay, this could be, oh, this seems disordered or whatever, but sometimes you're in this survival mode, right? I thought this was another interesting study that Jessica looked at it, and up to almost 70% of people with celiac disease have like a major to moderate impact on their overall dating life. And so they asked people in New York City, and they looked at it, kind of surveyed them. And, up to 40% of them were kind of uncomfortable explaining that they had to be gluten-free on a date. Some of them engaged in those like kind of risky eating behaviors of like cheating on the gluten-free diet. About 8% of them just intentionally ate gluten, right? Like chugging a beer or having just regular pizza. And then some of them were also really hesitant to kiss their partner. So subsequently too, they looked at Columbia, they did a kissing study. I don't know. I think it's a poster. I don't know if it's in a paper yet. But they actually gave a partner like crackers, like saltine crackers. And I think they had to eat 10 crackers. And then they had to kiss their partner. And then they tested the gluten. So they're actually, excitingly so, was not that significant amount of gluten when they kissed, even though the person had real gluten and they kissed the person with celiac, and all these things were tested. I forgot how many couples they had. It was about 10 or 12, maybe it was under 20. I believe. So it's a small study, but it's an interesting one because many times in my being a dietitian, many people ask me about that. Like, oh my gosh, like, does my, partner have to, brush their teeth, and do they, all those kind of things. And so we just don't have enough data on that. Right. So basically the study said, you can wash your mouth out with some water if you really are worried, but overall those proteins that would affect you are kind of denatured in your mouth, even just by chewing them and swallowing them. So kind of a cool one, but of understandingly, many people were hesitant to kiss their partner if they were dating or if they were on a date. More females were hesitant than the males in the study. I thought this was a really good visual kind of aid to look at this. So this is really the Hallmark study back in 2007 in Italy. And this is this Carlo Cattassi's group in Italy. They looked at people with celiac disease, and they gave them 0, 10, or 50 milligrams of gluten over 3 months. And so they tested them. And at the end, they did a scope, and they noticed that, of course, the 50 milligrams, which is pretty significant, would induce that villus damage. So that's a decent amount of gluten. As you could see here, the gluten-free watchdog, who is also known as Tricia Thompson, she's also a registered dietitian with celiac disease. She does a lot of really neat work, and this was a great way to kind of look at, because sometimes people worry that one speck is going to cause major issues. But as you can see in this picture, there is a quarter, and there's a decent amount of crumbs on this little plate. And that actually is 10 milligrams. And so in the study, people, and again, it's hard to get 10 milligrams every single day, but at least those individuals do not have any damage in their GI tracts. So again, just reiterating, it's not saying you can just eat a bunch of gluten, but kind of reminding some individuals who are freaking out about touching a doorknob or doing something that there's a decent amount of gluten that is needed to even cause that damage. And that's, I think a good visual aid. So again, eating out, like I said, I always say kind of plan ahead. I'm sure there's different apps and things that you all might use for eating out or kind of finding what's around. I know now it's international that Find Me Gluten Free is something that we will use here. I know there's other ones as well. But I know my friends are used to me of like, okay, Lori, where do you want to eat out at? Or if they know these places have gluten-free options, then those will be places they'll maybe recommend too. So again, I always say kind of call ahead. We again do not recommend in the US like eating out of a shared fryer. So again, if the fryer has like chicken nuggets that has regular breading, we do not recommend eating like French fries out of that shared fryer. So again, that is from very small studies, but at this time we're still avoiding those shared fryers. So those are sometimes the things that we look over where if someone's not feeling better, okay, if you're eating out of a shared fryer a couple times a week, you could be getting that inadvertent gluten kind of sprinkling into your system that could kind of be stirring that witch's brew. That might not make you feel so good. You're tired, you're crabby, all those kind of things, but you might not connect that as being much of an issue, right? So I think that's another interesting thing is some people might be having damage, as we know, but not have those overt symptoms more and more of having like, okay, projectile vomiting after eating gluten or having overt diarrhea or something. They might just, be crabby, be tired, all those kind of things. So lastly, I always say, be an advocate, really speak up when you are eating out and just be concise with your needs and be, keep it simple, clear. I know when I was first diagnosed, like I just am a people pleaser. I don't want to be fussy. I just want to eat whatever that they have for me. And so it was hard for me sometimes to like specify my needs. Or I remember the first time I'd be like sweating, trying to explain like I'd be gluten free and I knew they could do it, but I still just explain and like state my needs. It was very interesting for me as a patient versus like, someone with having celiac versus explain to someone how they should, explain their needs. So it was a very interesting turnaround. So again, living at home, I think another thing is other considerations of where you might have get gluten at times. So again, in a shared kitchen, cross contact can happen. I tell people, of course, you could live in a shared kitchen overall, just keeping in mind, someone could have regular beer and, my children have regular cookies and even regular bread. They're not baking bread from scratch. So it's in my house, right? Or we're not sharing like the toaster. So there's a few things that I recommend just to be aware of how there could be some cross contact. So sometimes that repeated cross contact makes someone not feel better or all that, like they have kind of like a little bit of like, intestinal inflammation still going on. So these are some different things that we talk about, looking at, not saying you have to get a brand new cutting board, but be mindful and just wash it with hot soap and water, right? This is something that we looked at for actually the study that we're doing to have like statements across the board of like what we do recommend of like the most risky things where gluten can get in, right? And other universities are not as strict as we seem to be. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't mean to be too strict, but these are just things over the years that we recommend. So as you can imagine, for a lot of these recommendations that dietitians might give or people that you might read online, you have to remember that there's no money in it compared to drug studies. So a lot of these are recommendations that might have been from allergy studies or allergy, looking at those top allergens. So for like a wheat allergy and whatnot, it's just very hard to study how much gluten can be in some of those things. Now, there is a small study looking at like the shared toasters, and there was not much cross contact. But again, I always say they had to take the toast out, put it in a baggie, transport it, do all these things. And so I think still overall, I think if, you can have your own toaster, that would be great. If it's a toaster oven, you could easily share it. Just put something to kind of protect your bread in that item or whatever, in that, that machine or whatever you have, the toaster oven or the air fryer or whatever you might have. So again, you could easily, wash out in a waffle maker and whatnot, but sometimes it's nice to have like a separate waffle maker that's gluten-free. I have like a little mini one that I utilize as like an easy peasy kind of thing. Again, the main thing I think is that an issue is like any kind of the thing that you put a knife, a fork, a spoon into. So, a peanut butter, almond butter, jams, jellies, mayonnaise, things like that, that might be like a jar or a kind of a container like that. Again, if you had a black light, you looked in there, it could have a bunch of gluten in there if people are using it for their regular bread, right? So I always say, like, if you can get like a squeeze container, that would be awesome. Just that could reduce that kind of cross contact. So again, as I mentioned too, I'm touching on more of these like persistently, if you're not feeling good, sometimes if your labs are high or your serologies, like we said, look at like cross contact, go over things with a fine tooth comb, are you inadvertently getting gluten from things you might not even think of? Like sometimes those shared, tools in the kitchen. And again, sometimes people will have changes in their job or buy the wrong kind of bread, not realize it. I had one lady, she just started the gluten-free diet. And she said, Lori, I tried the best bread ever. And I was like, really? What's it called? And she's like, potato bread. And I was like, potato bread, can you get it? And so she got it. The first ingredient was white flour. And I was like, no, because the doctor's like, can you talk to her again? What's she eating? And her numbers are still high. I'm like, that's so weird. She was doing so good, but she hated all the gluten-free stuff. So sometimes people think, oh, it's a potato bread. This is fine. And this is like, and then you realize, oh my gosh, you could be getting gluten. Again, oats are a big one in the US as far as like making sure that it's gluten-free. People are doing everything with oats. And so that could be kind of one of those issues. 20% of individuals with celiac disease could react to that protein, which is called avenin in oats. So kind of similar how people react to the gluten in, wheat, rye, and barley. Again, there's no like test to know if you are going to react to that. But if some people have like ongoing gas, bloating, and maybe their numbers aren't high, but they're having symptoms, I'll say, okay, maybe some of those, the oats are sometimes reacting. You just don't feel very good. It does sometimes raise people's numbers as well if it's cross contact. I do want to just touch on the Bristol stool scale. So again, looking at that when I'm talking to patients of, how are your bowel movements, right? Some people say, oh, I go to the bathroom every day, but they're having type 1, which are these little tiny, almost like nuts. And that actually means you're constipated, right? That means it took a long time for that to get through your GI tract. So this is another kind of way to look at like, okay, how is my GI tract doing? If I'm having very loose stools, or again, if your stools are sticking to the toilet bowl, you could be malabsorbing, right? So I just wanted to kind of touch on that. And I always talk about like, how can we optimize your bowel movement so that you're not either spending too much time in the bathroom or you have like efficient bowel movements, right? Because yes, I see what happens when we get into our 80s and 90s. Sometimes our GI tract's already lazy. So anything we could do now to kind of optimize your GI health, right? Again, when I always talk about fiber, I always say, fiber is great in whole foods. Sometimes these fiber supplements might, cause some issues with individuals. There's two kinds of fiber. There's the insoluble fiber that kind of pushes things through your GI tract. So you think about like skins of apples and things like that. And coconut, dried fruits, that's that insoluble fiber. Also, if you think about things like corn on the cob or things like that, it never changes shape in your GI tract, versus that soluble fiber is really good for your cholesterol. Even like the gastric emptying for people if they're feeling like they're always hungry. So eating more of those kind of soluble fiber foods could be beneficial. So again, I always say like, yeah, if someone's having ongoing symptoms and they are eating too much fiber, that could be a thing. So I have some females who are eating way too much, right? They have really good intentions, but they're so gassy and bloated. And then they go over what they're eating and they're eating like 50 to 60 grams of fiber. Well, that's a bit too much. We recommend more like 25 to 30 grams of fiber a day. So sometimes I'll say like, okay, gradually increase it. Stay curious because, even though a lot of these foods are healthy for us, some foods can kind of cause that fermentation and make you feel not so great in different quantities, right? So I'll just want to touch a bit. I know I'm probably going over a bit about, but the low FODMAP diet I want to touch on. I could have like an hour talk on this alone. But the low FODMAP diet was all developed down at the Monash University in Australia. And it was in about 2005, 2006, they really started looking at this, and they first looked at fructose. And they basically found that some of these different kinds of carbohydrates are very highly fermentable. And everybody knows about lactose, right? So people will say, oh, I'm lactose intolerant. Everyone knows what that is, basically. You don't have to have like a nutrition degree to know about, oh, lactose intolerance. If I consume lactose like ice cream and I get gassy or bloated, people know what that is. Well, they started to find in the lab other foods that were very fermentable or did different kind of things in the GI tract. And fructose was the big first one that they looked at. Interestingly, so fructans the fructans are the ones that wheat, rye, and barley are all part of. So those are all fermentable on their own, just they're all high in fructans. So sometimes people will say, oh gosh, I feel so much better on a gluten-free diet. Well, they're just eating less fermentable food. So they might notice, oh, I feel less, of a beer brewery going on in my GI tract. I feel a little better, right? And they might not have celiac. They just notice that they're just having less of those GI symptoms. And really, they found that this whole approach to this was really beneficial for IBS. But again, the goal is to like not be on such a restricted diet for so long. You want to reintroduce things. I wanted to show this slide. You can also access it also like the full Dr. Kate Scarlatta. She has a whole website. She wrote a really great book called Mind Your Gut that just came out this past year. And she has a really good podcast. She actually interviewed me for her podcast on celiac disease. It's very hard to listen to my voice, but it was exciting to be interviewed. And it's all GI based. It's her and then a GI psychologist that do the podcast. And who's from the University of Michigan. And so this is a great, I think, visual aid for myself as a clinician, but also a patient. So I can kind of give this to patients and say, okay, sometimes you're having a lot of like, say, diarrhea. Well, sometimes things like the fructose might be bothering them, right? So if they're eating a bunch of, pears, figs, plums, all those kind of things, those have a lot of fructose, which could be still is healthy, but could pull water into their gut, causing that kind of looser stools or things. So that's where you can kind of go back to that stool scale too and see, okay, are you having constipation? Are you having hard rocks? Because I want you to get water into your gut. I want you to pull that water into your gut. So eat some of those fruits that are going to do that. And then again, if someone's having major gas, okay, be curious about some of those gassy foods. So I think this is a good visual aid, not saying that all these foods are like, oh, the devil, they're the worst things for you, but it's more of like, okay, let's stay curious of what foods might stir the pot, because sometimes you might not feel the best, but you're eating a super high amount of things with honey all of a sudden, right? And honey is great for you. But again, that might be causing you to have a little looser stools. And then you're thinking, I'm getting glutened. And you might not be getting glutened at all, right? You just might be eating a little bit more things that can kind of loosen it up. So I think it's all about staying curious. And then the biggest goal is really to get off this like restricted diet, because I didn't have enough time to put a slide on here, but they looked at it with patients. And if they were on it for too long on the restriction and eating nothing that ferments, right? You want something to ferment in your colon. If it doesn't have any kind of brewery going on, that's a bad thing. If you have stasis in your colon, that's not good. So they actually found that the people were on it for too long, they had increase in like some of the bad bacteria, right? And they had a decrease in some of the good bacteria. So they might have felt like $1,000,000, but the goal is for them to have a little bit of garlic or a little bit of onions or have some of these things that might kind of stir the pot, but in smaller doses. So I have to work with that for a lot of patients very often, because they see this diet and they avoid everything on the sheet for a year, and then they think they can't eat anything, right? So it's, again, staying curious and whatnot. I did want to touch on, like I said, the most common one is that kind of lactose intolerant that we see early on in diagnosis, and sometimes people will have it regardless. Some ethnicities are higher in getting lactose intolerance. But another one is, like I said, that's like a visual of those villi on the left side, and the tips of those villi, like I said, are where those lactase enzymes are that break down, lactose. As I mentioned, it's very high. 65% worldwide have, its population have lactose intolerance. And I think it diminishes with age. So usually when you're in your mid-20s, people will notice, I have a little lactose intolerance. I don't feel the same as I did to eating ice cream anymore. Like, what the heck, So that can happen. But then also you could have things like, IBD or Crohn's or colitis. You could have celiac disease. And so many people come in and they're kind of like warped, that they think like, I thought lactose was my problem for like 10 years. And it was actually gluten, right? So it's hard for them to rewire because they're already like dairy free and now they're gluten free. And it's like, you might be able to have low lactose. So you might be able to have butter, ghee, lactose free dairy stuff versus feeling like you have to avoid all of it. Again, the highest lactose foods would be like, milk, regular milk, and regular yogurt, not like a Greek yogurt. Greek yogurt, since they're filtered, they're thicker, they have less of the lactose or the sugar in the milk. But yeah, oftentimes I'll tell patients, well, if you're going to have ice cream, you could always take a lactase enzyme or a lactate kind of a pill before you eat that. And you could still at least enjoy that. And like, or, if you want to avoid it, fine, but you might be able to incorporate that into your lifestyle for some like joy, right? So I think that's the key, is also finding joy in all your food and like not feeling like I can't eat that forever, right? Because great, good for you. You're following the strict gluten-free diet, and, no joy. So again, if you're not doing dairy, you could still get some of the calcium and some of the vitamin D and things in some of those plant-based milks. Green leafy vegetables, sardines, salmon with bones, and some of the lentils and beans and things like that. Tofu has some calcium and vitamin D as well. Again, I think a big thing too is like when you're traveling, just really, like I said, kind of plan ahead. I kind of surround a lot of my travel with doing like, okay, where are we going to go? I want to go to this gluten-free place or this place. So I have something to look forward to in a way, or, different things like that to kind of, make some of my trips exciting, which I could do now because my kids are only 5 and 7. So they kind of are like there for the ride. They're like, okay, mommy, like, great. So again, I think it's finding that balance of like salty snacks, sweet snacks, finding things, crunchy, crispy, flaky, whatever you can to kind of keep yourself sane. Again, when you're traveling, really research the areas when you're traveling to see what are the local recommendations, what are some of the things that are out there to try. And like I mentioned, that Find Me Gluten Free app is now international. So that's kind of a nice one to see what's out there. Just wanted to have this as a reference. I'll send out the slides that, like, for constipation, which was an issue I had prior to diagnosis, is that like it's all about like what to add to the diet versus take this away, take that away. Really, I always look at like how much fluid are you drinking? Are you drinking water? Give them other ways to kind of give some oomph to their water, whether it's cucumbers or fruit or whatever it could be. And are they getting fiber, and try to get the fiber, like I said, in the foods as well versus only supplements, right? So getting in those things like kiwis. There's 3 studies, I think now, that 2 kiwis per day can help you with bowel movements, having a kind of complete evacuation. And feeling, like that you're completely evacuated, the measures of like the gas, the bloating. The participants said the kiwis were much better than doing mycelium husk as the fiber supplement in their bowel movements. So, things like I said before, when you think about those FODMAPs, things people might avoid, but actually can help for constipation, is watermelon, blackberries, cherries, the prunes, plums, peaches, nectarines. Those have a lot of that fructose and polyols that can kind of pull water into the colon and kind of flush it a bit. So I always say, like, focus on adding things versus take this out, take that out. And again, just to reiterate, that low FODMAP diet is really indicated for diarrhea, not for constipation. So I am like livid with how many people get sent to me on that have constipation. I'm like, no, you don't go low FODMAP. You want to do some of these high FODMAP, So it's all about educating, and the doctors don't unfortunately know. This is kind of just like balancing the overall gluten-free diet. So just for reference, some different gluten-free grains and things like that we'll talk about with patients to kind of consider, change it up a bit. And thank you. So these are my daughter, Ruby and Rose. Up on the top right, I was so excited when this is actually 10 years ago. I was in Prague in 2015, and I did a talk on the gluten-free diet. And 3 months later, I was diagnosed with celiac. But next to me, that's Peter Gibson, and he's the one who developed the low FODMAP diet. So I was so lucky. I was on a panel with him. And so I said, I have to get a picture with you. And then below is the 2 doctors I work with, Dr. Kupfer and Dr. Semrad. They are amazing female physicians that are in GI and doing a lot at the U of C. So thank you again. I know I totally went over, but if anybody has questions, like I said, I'm happy to, answer questions, do another one.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much, Laurie.
Yes.
Honestly, that was like the most comprehensive whistle-stop tour of celiac disease I've ever seen in my life. I learned so much. I was taking notes.
Thank you.
But guys, please do put your questions in the chat. because do you have time, Laurie, for a quick
Yeah,
Q&A?
yeah,
I want to kick things off, something that me and my clients have been talking about this week, and we've had a bit of back and forth, and I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
yeah,
Gluten in paper straws, paper cups. Have you heard about like what obviously some places do pasta straws. We know we can't have that, but is there any
yeah.
like studies or any information on this paper straws situation, paper cups?
I know. I need to look into it a little bit more. But I know I've seen that with like the noodle kind of things for the straws. Yeah, no, that definitely is a concern. I know. I think that gluten-free watchdog did a write-up on it recently, but yeah, it is kind of a scary thing because you just don't know always what you're getting, right? These places have good intentions and oh, it could be, compostable or whatever it is, and you're like, so no, that is a good question. I don't have like the best answer because I don't know. I know there are some brands out there that you can, buy even just as like a regular consumer, but a lot of these restaurants and things, I know historically have had that. But I don't know like what brands or really what to look out
Yeah.
for yet. But no, it is. It's something that's a little bit of a concern here,
Mm,
right?
I agree, and I think that it's so hard to know because outside of food products, ingredients aren't discussed. Like they don't have to
No,
label on a paper
yeah,
cup. They don't have to tell us what it's made of.
exactly.
But I guess
Yeah,
it's a thing. I mean, from paper straws, I've never had any issues personally,
yes. Neither have I yet. Yes,
but it's just something that keeps getting asked. And obviously,
yes.
I don't have an answer, but we've got no research.
Yeah,
Got no
no,
research behind
exactly. Yeah, there's no research. But no, I've definitely had patients that have taken pictures of things that they're like, look, this was made.
I've got a
Sorry.
couple of messages that have come through in the chat whilst you were speaking, that I think is a couple of things worth touching on. A client of mine struggled with something similar. So Mariam is talking about, obviously, you mentioned that it's not necessary for a house to be 100% gluten free as long as the prevention measures are strictly in place from across contact. Um,
Yeah.
in terms of parents with young children, the toddlers touching the plate, putting their fingers in your mouth. I've had a client who got gluten by the fact that they had pizza and then they're going, mummy, mummy. And then
Hmm.
is there a danger to making, for example, your kids following a gluten-free diet in the home or majority of the time? Is that something that you'd recommend in young children when they are, you know, putting
Oh,
their hands everywhere in the house and it's quite hard to control? Or do you recommend keeping them on the gluten?
yeah. No, that is such a good question because I know part of the guidelines say they want the children to get introduced to it in a way. But, for some people, I think it's like finding that if someone else in the household can like feed them that versus you, because yeah, I can completely agree. I knock on wood, don't think I've gotten gluten from it, but I definitely have had heightened anxiety with my own kids where I was like, okay, they eat gluten and like it's frustrating because it's if I'm like, okay, I don't want to, so yes, I think it's like finding what's going to be comfortable for someone if someone's having ongoing symptoms and like their numbers aren't going down and they're really getting gluten often, then yeah, you could always have a plan of like maybe having them eat gluten outside the house at like the daycare or at the grandma's house, and things like that. So they could even get a little gluten in, so they're getting some in versus zero. But yeah, no, I think the struggle is real. There's not enough data out there of saying like, okay, you keep them gluten free. That's not necessarily going to protect them in the future if they eat in 5 years yet. We don't have enough data on that. You know what I mean? So if
Mm,
the person feels comfortable that someone else in the family, like their spouse or the grandma, could feed them gluten on the weekends or whatever, and they get it sprinkled in here and there, that could kind of help to trick their immune system so they don't develop other allergies or those other concerns, at least in the US, like with the guidelines of introducing all the different foods. But
yeah.
no, that is something that is not talked about. And like I said, the dietitian from Colombia, who's an expert who has a baby now, is asking me, what do I do the other day? And I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? I just, it's hard because my kids kind of know, like I will prepare something for them and it's like it's raw chicken, right? Then I go and I wash my hands, make sure, nothing else is, for me, just I have to like before I do stuff. So yes, and I'm an expert and I've been doing this for 10 years versus someone that's brand new diagnosed and they have a baby and they're not thinking straight, right? Like it's hard to think and they're sleep deprived. So yeah, I think of finding that balance of whatever is comfortable of like, if you could get them some gluten at that, 4, 6 months, whatever is the recommendation now, to have it sprinkled in here and there.
Mm.
And if you don't feel comfortable, I get it because yeah, some people do get sick. Right. It goes in their mouth and whatnot. I don't know how I did, but I think I was always kind of a little bit, a little nuts about things too, trying to,
Yeah.
so yeah, no, it's definitely a challenge. So yeah, if someone feels comfortable saying I'm just going to be gluten free in the house, the kid will eat stuff when we go out to dinner. If they get bread or different things like that, they'll eat that.
Mm.
That could be another way too to get it in.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that one. I think that it's so incredibly di dealing with an adult compared to children when you're relying on them to not contaminate is such a different story. And I completely agree that, the best from my experience talking to celiacs, obviously I've not got children myself, so I never want to act like I know.
No,
But, as long as you
yeah,
you have peace of mind, don't you?
yeah, yeah,
They can have it for lunch at school, they can wash their hands at school, dinner's
totally.
gluten free. Um,
Yeah,
I think that that's a really nice balance to have. Um,
yeah,
with I just got a couple of questions on because obviously you did a really great kind of visual demonstration that we don't often get especially in the UK around the malabsorption that can happen. I'm going to
yes.
pronounce it wrong. What's the portion of the small intestine? The duodenum?
Oh yeah, the you could say the duodenum or the
What?
duodenum. Yeah,
Okay,
I
okay.
know duodenum. She's
So,
trying to.
Sophia's just speaking about malabsorption, and she's strictly gluten free, and she's been gluten free for many years.
Mhm.
Like antibodies are low, so she's following the diet, but still struggling
Yes,
with deficiencies. Um, I've got a couple of clients who really, really struggle with this as well. Do you have like
yes,
a particular port of call that you guys do when somebody is struggling with malabsorption, not absorbing vitamin D, for example, calcium, even though they are strictly gluten free and they have been for a while?
yes. I mean, that's a good question because that actually came up with myself last year. So what I ended up doing, because I was up for my 45-year-old colonoscopy, I did my follow-up endoscopy that I didn't do for 10 years because I had 2 kids. So my recommendation would be is if someone is like low on iron, or if because the iron is absorbed there primarily, so I think like so the challenge is your blood work or your serologies might be normal, but you want to also make sure in this kind of case, if you can, that your intestines are healed. So you want to make sure they're all like fluffed back up like a shag carpet. So mine was normal, so then I still had low iron. Now again, for females, the challenges too, unfortunately, is like we are having menstrual cycles and we might be more sensitive to getting that anemia. So even myself, after 10 years, but I had this weird, all of a sudden, low iron. I never had that. So it could be a weird thing. So that's why I always say stay on top of it and stay curious that like, I don't know if it was Sophia, was it? But like you might, maybe talk to your doctor. Yes, it seems invasive to do an endoscopy. You do not have to go that route. You could do liquid iron or see if you are at a low iron, like ferritin is very low, then maybe they will do an iron infusion. I did 2 of them. It helped overall. But yeah, those are those kind of things where you would think you would be overall like healed, right? But you could have these persistent nutrient absorption issues on and off. So I think it's something to stay on top of. And that's why we usually say, if you could, but I know it's not across the board, to get your vitamin levels checked, even if it's like once a year or every 18 months, just to see like, is your vitamin D in the gutter? That's not going to be good for your metabolism. It's almost like a hormone in your body. And then is your iron low? So, for some females, they just have that lower iron and it's hard to get it up to get those numbers up. But we know if your iron's low, that like your red blood cells, which carry iron, also carry oxygen throughout the body. So you could feel very tired, very fatigued, very like you can't, like your body can't carry that oxygen. And so that's the challenge when you're anemic, right? So, yeah, so I think, basically the bottom line is advocate for yourself. If you feel not so great and you have to nap all the time, you might benefit from doing an iron infusion or doing a higher, like a liquid iron that's like a more absorbable source, maybe. So those I would say to consider. And then, if, any GI issues like ongoing, like diarrhea or any other things that, yeah, there might be, malabsorption. And another side note is like sometimes people will have randomly like H. pylori, which is like that Helicobacter pylori, which is like bacteria in your stomach that could cause ulcers. So it's, something that they could test in like your stool. But, I've had people like that where it's like, well, no wonder they were having vitamin deficiencies. They had H. pylori. So then you take like a round of antibiotics and you kill that bacteria. So there is some other weird stuff that could go on. So I think, follow up with the GI doctor, follow up with your primary care just to rule those kind of things out, and be your own advocate because, yeah, a lot of times it's overlooked and, oh, you're fine. You're a female, you're vegetarian, you'll be low. And you're like, okay, that's not ideal for me. Like I want to feel optimized with my nutrition and my quality of life.
Yeah, I think
So,
that
yeah,
it's just absolutely awful that obviously I know that your healthcare system, that's a whole topic for
yeah.
another day. The
Oh, I know.
differences, but in the UK, I think you have to be on the brink of death to get an iron infusion on the NHS. It's very,
Oh,
very
oh,
difficult.
yes.
Um,
Okay, totally.
so
Oh,
but
that's
guys,
true.
I cannot stress enough, do not be afraid to put forward suggestions to your doctor.
Yeah.
If you call them up and they tell you that you can't have a blood test, don't stop there. Don't say, okay, no worries, bye. I'll try again in a couple
Mm,
of months. I'm telling you now, just push. Say, oh, could I speak to somebody else? Because you might feel like you're being annoying and difficult at the time, but it has to be done. It has to be done, and it can feel so uncomfortable. But always just ask. I booked in my celiac review and I brought it forwards 2 months. And all I did was when she said that it was in 2 months' time, I said, well, can we move it forward? And then she went off and checked and she moved it forward. So don't stop when they say no. Keep pushing, keep asking questions, bring up the infusion. If it helps to just remind them exactly how long you have been low on vitamin D, how long you have been low on iron as well, and just have a diary, have the notes, have the facts with you at the appointment. So they literally cannot ignore you. And it can also help as well to bring someone with you who's not gonna let them kind of walk all over you as well, guys. So that was a bit of a side note, but that can be really, really helpful. Got another question, Laurie. I'm so sorry. Do
oh,
you have time?
yeah.
Are you sure? I know that you're
Yes.
very, very busy. Um,
No.
but I'm just trying to go through them one by one. We've got everyone talking, you see. This is such an interesting talk.
Yes, that's good.
Um,
Totally. I know there's so many things it's hard to answer them all, but yeah, we'll
Yeah.
definitely address them.
So Grace has said that she's struggling with getting a balance between keeping to her low FODMAP diet and getting enough iron in because she's vegetarian and allergic to soy. So, so she relies a lot on legumes, but they're also high FODMAP.
Yes.
So, do you have like any
Yeah.
suggestions of low FODMAP iron sources?
Yeah, and I mean, so I would say like, some of the nuts and the seeds will have some. If you do things like chickpeas and you say if it's like a can of chickpeas, that helps to kind of pull some of those galactans or the stuff that makes you gassy out. So you could even take like say canned chickpeas, rinse them, and then so that's kind of a way that you can incorporate some of the beans. Oh, did you lose me? I know it says my connection's unstable again.
Did you just
Um,
say rinsing the chickpeas literally just under the tap can help?
Yes, yes. So
Okay.
you rinse them and rinse them, drain them, and that will take a lot of those galactans out. And these are things that they've been studying down at the Monash University. I'd also say too, the goal is for you to not be on low FODMAP for too long. Maybe even download that Monash app. I don't know if you have it. I don't know if it's like $8 or $10 on like an app for your phone, but they update constantly the FODMAPs that they're testing in the laboratory to see oh, like they found that like broccoli, actually the tops of broccoli is low FODMAP, but the stems are really high FODMAP. So like that's opened the doors for people sometimes too, right? To say, oh, I could actually maybe tolerate some other things. So, but yes, I think it is a challenge. So maybe even an iron supplement, or again, if you could tolerate oats have some iron, quinoa, and then kind of, yes, tucking in those like nuts and seeds is tolerated. And then, yeah, hopefully not stay in the low FODMAP too long. So I think for some people, my goal for is to like reintroduce things back in and see what you could tolerate. And sometimes they find, oh, there's only like two or three things that really stirred the pot for them, and then they can have more of a varied diet.
Mm. Okay, that's interesting. So nobody should really stay on a low FODMAP diet for long periods of
No,
time.
no, no. Ideally not, right? You could have some low FODMAP modifications, and for sure they did a recent study that they found the fructans and fructose were or I'm sorry, the galactans and the fructans were the highest that caused gas and bloating, right? And that makes sense. Garlic, onions, cauliflower, beans, those were more the highest offenders versus some of the other ones in the FODMAPs. So yeah, I think they're hopefully finding ways that you don't have to be so restricted for so long, and maybe do like a kind of a low FODMAP light version, they call it, kind of cherry picking out some of the FODMAPs of the high offenders.
Mm, mm. And along the lines with the FODMAP diet, because obviously I think sorry Jury if I pronounced your name wrong. I think that's right. But she kind of has gone into the fact that, IBS do people with celiac disease higher have a higher chance of developing IBS like because of the gut damage, or like is it often just a misdiagnosis? Like can they be isolated conditions? Like what is the link between celiac and IBS?
I know that is such a good question. I have a slide for that on one of my other talks that I mean, I think it's like almost up to 50% of people like that have IBS. It's some sort of a thing where it's like with celiac disease, up to 40% or 45% or something have IBS overlap, right? Because it's something that people are diagnosed sometimes even prior to it, just saying, oh, you have IBS, you have IBS, right? It's kind of that diagnosis of exclusion. There's no real significance of inflammation going on or any, like, it's kind of like, ruling things out. Now I think, yeah, I think when people have celiac disease, I think sometimes too, you're more aware of some of your symptoms, right? And then that kind of can kind of cause people more to be, kind of more like alert to like their GI symptoms. And then they might develop the IBS after it, right? Because maybe they have more anxiety. Maybe they're avoiding foods, or now they went from diarrhea to constipation, or vice versa. So I think we do see that IBS sometimes after the diagnosis, but honestly, I think it's usually before of that kind of celiac disease kind of smoldering in the GI tract. They have weird GI symptoms that's unexplainable. So yeah, IBS is also very common in like Crohn's disease or colitis, ulcerative colitis. Huge overlap with that as well.
Mm.
So yeah,
Mm, okay, that's interesting. I think that it can be very, very confusing for people because, are my symptoms,
yeah,
is it IBS? Have I been glutened? Um,
yes,
and I think along those lines, I had a quick question that's just bounced off in my head actually, because I think that I want to make sure that we stick to questions that are going to help as many people as possible. So with eliminating foods? Do you know when you have like something's not right?
yeah,
Would you recommend starting like let's say like a blanket statement? It's a celiac still having stomach issues. What
yes.
is usually your first port of call? Like what do we eliminate?
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good question. So usually then I'll maybe with them take a 24-hour recall and kind of see what is your normal breakfasts that you might have in your kind of repertoire. What's your normal lunches? Do you eat snacks? What are you drinking? All that kind of stuff. And then kind of go from there to see, oh, are they drinking a bunch of different, sodas or all these other things that cause it? Are they chewing gum? Are there other kind of like red flags that might be some easy ways to kind of pluck out? Okay, they might not have ever thought about lactose, but they might be having that. So that could be an easy one for some people, right? Doing lactose free options, and that might change their whole world. Like, oh my God, I'm a new person, right? For others, it might just be adding in some other things that they're not doing, right? They might not be eating enough. So it's all about adding in that variety. So I might have them do, more fruit versus taking things away. But usually I'll say, kind of looking at what their kind of patterns are. And if any of those foods might promote that gas or bloating or, things like that, then I'll kind of educate them on that and be like, there might be some swap outs. Let's see if we can, so that's kind of what I'll do, kind of dependent on it, because yeah, we don't want to like overly restrict too much to say, okay, now you have to be gluten free, soy free, nut free, this free, that free. And then they're like, eat, right? So yeah, I sometimes will do it kind of like peeling back the layers of an onion to be like, okay, maybe for this next, group of time, it might be, yeah, it could be lactose or some of those things. Again, fructose is a big one. If they're
Mm,
having a bunch of dried fruit every day for snacks and they're bloated or gassy, they might be overlooking some of those things that they're doing. That could be some simple changes too.
mm, mm. And along those similar lines, I think that y- there are those large common offenders, right? Like the fructose, the oats, the lactose. Oh, can you hear me, Laurie? I'm just trying to. I'm so sorry, guys. My chat keeps changing order of questions, so I'm trying to keep track of it, and then somebody replies, and then it goes into a completely different order again. So I'm trying to make sure that we get everything.
Yeah, no, totally. Sorry, it like froze on my end. I apologize.
Yeah, so I've just Kelsey's asked, she's got a couple of different questions. One of the questions related to what we were just talking about. Is it common? So is it common for people with celiac disease to, after diagnosis, suddenly start reacting to lots of different foods? Is that a thing, or is it more, would that be something different, like a more of a comorbid condition usually?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I have seen that in my 21 years of practice where, and it could be the fact that the whole world was your smorgasbord before. You never thought twice about food, right? And then all of a sudden now you have to be gluten free. And so, number one, yes, once you're gluten free for a long period of time, you might be more sensitive if gluten gets in inadvertently, right? That's definitely something that we do see clinically, that people are more sensitive, or but yeah, I think that like sometimes people are more just exquisitely aware of, oh, I get more bloating from lactose now. I never noticed that before because I just thought everyone felt a little bloated or whatever. So I do think we see that because people are just more like they're on alert, high alert if they're going to get glutened or if they're, you know what I mean? So I think we do see that. And again, it could affect someone's quality of life because now they're, oh my gosh, this is bothering me. That's bothering me. Right. So the goal is, yeah, I think like finding like, resources and other people who have celiac disease and things like that. But yeah, I don't think there's no other, I think, oftentimes these patients could be overly restricting, right? So I think, the goal is, yeah, seeing a dietitian, making sure, and someone could do, again, I don't know how often they do it there of like a allergy test. They're not the best, but that could be something else to rule out because some people might have overlapping things that could develop, right? We know that. People could develop different allergies over time too. So that could be something if you feel like you're going, losing it and it's hard to find out, that could be something to look at too. But I think, yes, people are more heightened awareness of their body and what they're eating and,
Mm,
so, and, the challenge is the gluten-free crap that some of the processed stuff, right, could have some weird ingredients that aren't the best for our gut. And so if you're eating a bunch of the gums and the this, that, and the other, sometimes that can make your stomach feel funky. So, so I always say be curious about what you're eating because it might be super safe and gluten-free and dairy free and vegetarian and blah 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 blah. But like it might be full of crap that makes you feel not so good.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah.
100%. I think it's great that you've mentioned obviously the different things, but with the allergy testing, I think that that's one that like commonly people rely on it. I know Kelsey, you've said that your
Yes.
allergy testing has come back negative multiple times. With that, it's
Okay, which is good.
important. Yeah, but it
Yeah.
will it won't show anything if you've not eaten it. If it's an antibody
Yes.
test, if it's not in your system, it will come back negative. So
That's true.
that's
Yeah.
important to be
It's
aware
not
of.
that sensitive. Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. It's not as sensitive as like a celiac test is. It's not that specific or sensitive for those tests. So yeah, no, I agree. So
Mm,
and then now again, I'm doing a talk coming up talking about histamine intolerance and sucrose intolerance and all these other things that people don't think about that
mm,
I've learned about. The nickel allergy and nickel allergy syndrome, all these things that it's like these are other considerations for some of these patients too.
yeah.
To look outside the box and not just label it, oh, your IBS, go low FODMAP.
Mm,
That's not the goal.
mm. And yeah, no, 100%. And I just think I'm well aware, Laurie, that we've gone over. Do you have time
Oh
for
yeah. Yeah, I have a couple more minutes. I have to go. I forgot that it's like Wednesdays. I have to pick up my daughter a little earlier, so I forgot.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, guys.
But yeah, no.
I will keep notes of the questions and
Okay.
because
Yeah,
there are
definitely.
still
I'm happy to like you could send me them and I can kind of like help like respond to them and like even put them in a message or whatever too.
thank
I'm
you.
happy to like because I know there's so many we've done that for the University of Chicago to,
Yeah, thank you.
there's so
So
much.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. I think just one more question, just because I've
Yeah.
seen it just scrolling through up, it's popped up a good few times. I think could you just give us, for example, like your top five supplements that you would recommend, for
Oh
example?
gosh.
Let's say
That's
deficiencies aside, like is there like a gold standard of is it a multivit? Is it a, would you
yeah.
recommend calcium? Like, is there anything that you most commonly recommend? I think that's a bit most commonly recommend for celiacs, or is there not really too much?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, depending if someone's newly diagnosed and they don't always have a balanced diet, doing like a multivitamin. Again, there's so many different ones in the US. I say, definitely making sure it's gluten free. Vitamin D would be even more important. Like calcium is important, but the vitamin D, making sure your vitamin D is checked. You want that to be above 50. So for some patients, doing vitamin D3 is a little bit better absorbed. So that's a big one because that affects your bone health, celiac disease. Um, it depends on the patient if they're having low energy or any like numbness or tingling or things like that. Doing some different B vitamins, as far as like supplement, like brands, it's so hard, like whether it's, Thorn or the different ones, just as long as it's like labeled gluten free. I know in the US we have different like stuff here than in the UK. There's a brand Frida, they're free of all the top allergens and gluten as well, including. So that's another brand I'll sometimes recommend to people. They have like miniature vites as well. So that's sometimes better tolerated for some patients that can't tolerate a big vitamin. Um, yeah, and then for some patients doing like a liquid, whether it's liquid B12 or a liquid iron, that could be at least sometimes better absorbed, or the sublingual B12 that goes underneath your tongue. So sometimes I'll recommend that, and that bypasses your GI tract and goes right through. So that sometimes, and then yeah, I mean, I usually recommend like really trying to get, if you can, get in like protein through your foods. But if you need to supplement with like a protein supplement, there's a variety of them out there, right? So it kind of depends on the different needs for people. So,
Mhm.
um, gosh, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's so many different things out there that's kind of some of the ones I'll mention. And yeah, I think calcium is recommended for females, not always for males. There's kind of like a wishy-washy thing about males, especially older males taking calcium supplements. It's not necessarily the best thing. So I don't know all the evidence to like explain now, but like that's one that we've kind of backed off on some of the male patients for calcium, but definitely for females, like, you want 1200 milligrams or even one a day, or getting it through some of the dietary stuff too.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I think you're
yeah,
absolutely right. It's so individual. And guys, just to round up on the
yes,
supplement front, base it off your blood tests first of all. Go off your deficiencies. The only way you know if you're deficient in something is if you get a blood
yeah.
test. And there is a guide to supplements in the Facebook group as well. So that's one to read over. And then
Oh,
if you
good.
don't like reading, I posted a YouTube video on it as well. So there
Oh,
is
cool.
resources on supplements within the group, just for you to
That's
look back
awesome.
on. And then obviously this webinar will be recorded, guys, as well. So with everything that Laurie was talking about in terms of the malabsorption earlier on in the talk, you can go back and watch that, and just digest the information, because it can be like a
Yes.
lot of information at once,
Oh,
right?
it's a lot. I know. I kind of stuffed a bunch in. I went over, but I was like, oh, so I can do this again and do its other specifics. And I'll send some PDF the slides as well. And then I have a really good article that talks about deficiencies and supplementation that they did from Colombia. It's a really good one that I'll send over. I send it to a lot of
Amazing.
my patients like in a PDF form. So that's a good one.
Amazing. Honestly, Laurie, I
Okay.
know we've taken up extra amount of an extra period of your time. So thank you so much for your help. We really, 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 really do appreciate it. And guys, thank you for joining. I hope that you found this talk useful. Okie dokie. So, oh, is Laurie, is Laurie gone again? Um, but yes, so that will be it for today, guys.
Oh, sorry.
Are you
Sorry, I
back?
lost you for a second. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I was like, oh, it's
No,
froze. Sorry.
I said a massive thank you, and there's a lot
Okay,
of thank
thank
yous in the
you.
chat as well. So we really, really do
Okay, thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Yes. And like I said, send me over those questions and I can help answer some of those. You can, send them out too.
Absolutely. I'm going to record all the questions, guys.
Okay.
So thank you for asking. And thank you, Laurie. Thank you so
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you again for having me. I appreciate
much.
it.